It was July 1989, and the Arabs at Jalalabad were in a dire situation. They were constantly bombarded from the air, and on their right flank, 27 Soviet tanks were rolling toward them. To defend themselves, they only had a few RPGs, which would only be effective in a short distance, and a 75mm cannon. The latter was operated by a young Saudi named Shafiq, who was killed in the attack. The rest of the Arabs were forced to withdraw to the mountains to the east, where tanks could not reach them. The 4-month Battle of Jalalabad was over, and it was a disaster by all standards. Around 3,000 Afghan mujahideen have been killed and wounded in the battle, including some 100 Arabs. I was greatly affected by the news of Shafiq's martyrdom, said Bin Laden a few years later. Shafiq was one of 2 Saudis who had discovered the site for al-Masadah for Bin Laden back in 1986. In 1989, he was still fighting for Bin Laden, this time as part of a more formalized military faction, which had been established in Peshawar in August 1988. The faction would later become known as Al-Qaeda, the base. The nature of Al-Qaeda cannot be understood without considering historical events surrounding its formation. The most important of these events was not the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, but Bin Laden's personal experiences at al-Masadah, which created an ambition to form an elite Muslim combat unit that would be an example to other Muslims worldwide. The foundation documents of Al-Qaeda note that within 6 months of Al-Qaeda, 314 brothers will be trained and ready. The number 314 is hardly random. It is the exact size of Prophet Muhammad's army at the Battle of Badr in 624 CE. We do not know if the Al-Qaeda founders literally meant to educate an army of 314 soldiers, but the statement underlines how religious symbolism was important to Al-Qaeda's self-perception. The foundation documents indicate that Al-Qaeda was founded as an international organization and its operations were not limited to a specific national territory. Al-Qaeda's area of operations was the Muslim world. Its goal was simply to fight for Islam or to lift the word of God to make his religion victorious. The struggle had no end state except to overcome their opponents to the last of those who fight with them and the Antichrist. But the method of Al-Qaeda, at least initially, was to participate in frontline fighting in Afghanistan. This is a fact which had been rather underappreciated in existing literature because we tend to see Al-Qaeda as an international terrorist network, instead of seeing it for what it was at the time, an elite Muslim combat unit which would spread the sentiment of jihad by participating directly at the front lines and by promoting a culture of martyrdom and self-sacrifice. This is why Bin Laden's first project as an Al-Qaeda leader was to find a new location for al-Masadah. In late 1988 or early 1989, Bin Laden sent a small group of fighters to the Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan. The group was led by a Yemeni veteran of the Masadah battle, who went by the nom de guerre Abu Tariq al-Maribi. According to an eyewitness, their task was to research new positions for al-Masadah. Abu Tariq gathered a handful of fighters and set up a small base in the eastern part of Nangarhar, in one of the many side valleys that run from the Kabul-Torkham highway into the massive Spin Gur mountain range on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. At the same time, a large battle was setting up, the Battle of Jalalabad, which started on March 6, 1989, would be the Mujahideen's first attempt to seize a major city from the Afghan communist regime. The purpose was to seize Jalalabad, the province capital of Nangarhar in eastern Afghanistan. This, in turn, would pave the way for the Mujahideen to enter Kabul and oust President Najibullah. The battle was orchestrated by the Pakistani Inter-Service Intelligence ISI in cooperation with the Afghan Mujahideen and involved around 5,000 to 7,000 fighters, including 8 senior commanders. The mood at the time was optimistic. It was expected that the Battle of Jalalabad would go into history as the major turning point in the war. According to some sources, Al-Qaeda's Shura Council was divided on whether to participate in the battle. The battle was seen as politically dubious due to the involvement of the ISI, and the Arabs did not have the adequate skills to contribute on the ground. They could perhaps support the Afghan Mujahideen with artillery, but nothing more. These were all valid arguments. Only 6 months had passed since the formal establishment of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had not yet had time to set up a well-trained and organized combat unit, especially not for a conventional type of battle that the Jalalabad operations represented. Jalalabad was a city situated on a large plain. The guerrilla tactics that Bin Laden's fighters had used to attack isolated Soviet posts in the mountains of Jaji would not work here. Nevertheless, Bin Laden insisted that the Arabs should participate in the battle. After all, frontline participation was raison d'etat for Al-Qaeda. How could they be an example to the Afghans if they failed to turn up at what was perceived as the most important battle of the war? Bin Laden initially sent a group of Arabs to join Abu Tariq in Nangarhar. After the Mujahideen advanced and captured Samarkand, a village only 20 kilometers east of Jalalabad, the Arabs were able to set up a series of positions close to the enemy for heavy artillery, mortars, and observation. Bin Laden continued to refer to this group as al-Masadah, as he told journalist Issam Daraz in 1989, the Arabs at al-Masat al-Ansar had around 18 military centers around Jalalabad. In addition to static positions, the Arab participated with at least 2 ambush groups that fought alongside the Afghans. Abu Tariq led one of these groups. A Saudi named Asmari was one of the original founders of al-Masadah, led the other. They carried out operations with 2 Afghans in particular, Commander Khalid, who worked for Yunus Khalis, Commander Sazem Noor, who worked for Abdul Rasul Sayaf. After the initial success of the Mujahideen in March 1989 with the capture of Samarkand and a number of important positions around Jalalabad, the battle turned into a stalemate. According to Afghan Arab historian Mustafa Hamid, the Arabs continued fighting as the fronts became half empty. When Afghan groups deserted due to the large number of casualties, the Arabs were finally forced to withdraw in July of 1989 when the Afghan regime recaptured Samarkand village. Most of the Arabs withdrew to the Arab near base at Farm 2, situated in Badakot, some 40 kilometers east of Jalalabad. We only have fragmented information about the role played by the Arabs in the battle. They were relatively small in number, and it is safe to assume they played a modest military role. But they had money to buy, and their own personal weapons, ammunition, and transportation vehicles, which probably made them more welcome among the Afghans. They occupied important frontline positions and worked with some of the most influential Afghan commanders in the region. There is little reason to believe that Bin Laden's men were marginalized by the Afghans during the battle. The Arabs were just too few to make a real importance or even a real impact, and they did not possess the skills or experience needed to fight a conventional battle. The Arabs may have had another less tangible impact on the Afghans and on the wider Muslim world. The Arabs stayed longer on the front lines than the Afghans, and they produced a higher number of casualties. In the years following 1989, Al-Jihad magazine, a glossy Arabic-language propaganda magazine issued by the Services Office in Peshawar, continued to present biographies of the Arab martyrs who had died in the battles around Jalalabad. Al-Jihad contributed to strengthening the narrative of martyrdom and self-sacrifice that would later become a crucial component in Al-Qaeda's strategy of suicide terrorism. After the Battle of Jalalabad was over, bin Laden received heavy criticism from certain parts of the Afghan Arab community in Pakistan. There was one particular leaflet being circulated in Peshawar. It argued that the Arab fighters had died in vain due to the lack of proper leadership and coordination. It called for an immediate pullout of Arabs from the Jalalabad area. The Arabs should halt further operations until a proper organization had been established that could make sound decisions regarding when and how they should contribute to further military campaigns. Apparently, the author saw neither the service office nor al-Qaeda as qualified to fulfill that role at that time. The author was Mustafa Hamid, and it was not the last time he would criticize bin Laden. Mustafa Hamid went on to become one of the most prolific Afghan Arabs, and he stayed in the region as an activist throughout the 1990s, but never formally joined al-Qaeda. He wrote an astounding 12-volume account of the Afghan Arabs, which is an invaluable source of information for researchers to this day. It is hard to judge how impactful Mustafa Hamid's leaflet was at the time. The Afghan Arab environment in Peshawar was filled with internal disagreements and personal feuds. The leaflet must have been seen as part of the general criticism against bin Laden for wanting to establish his own organization separate from the services office and implicitly take over leadership of the Afghan Arab movement. Bin Laden was used to such criticism by now, and it can hardly have made a difference, because after 1989, the Arabs retained a military infrastructure in Nangarhar. Over the course of the next 2 years, al-Qaeda would build up a chain of bases, camps, and observation posts in the area stretching from Torkham Gate on the eastern border with Pakistan until the Sam Kahil Mountain, situated only some 20 kilometers from Jalalabad. In this way, Jalalabad front line effectively became a new military base for bin Laden.